where do you separate your life from your art and what's going, and you find often that they're so interlocked, interlaced,
Mhm.
and you start losing track of where one begins and the other leaves off. And for us, that's a good thing because it leads us to the truth.
Jeff has been an amazing pianist and musical director for over 26 Broadway shows. He can call his personal friends names like Stephen Sondheim, John Kander, uh, uh, Mark Shaman. He is an amazing musical director and a maestro. He conducted the original cast of Into the Woods on Broadway. So we're so very lucky to have him. Once again, Jeff Saver.
So anyway, this song is that Steve Cole and Jeff Saber wrote. They performed at the Drama League Salute to Broadway Lyricists, and like a couple years ago? A year ago. It was the opening number, so pretend that you're fresh and newly sitting down in your seats, and you haven't been sitting here for the last hour. And it's called Without the Words, but I'm going to do it with the words, okay? As Gertrude Stein didn't quite say, a song is a song is a song. And it's Webster who defines a song as dots upon some lines, or as notes squeezed into bars. But to me, there's something wrong. There's something more, something eloquent that helps the music to take wing. Something underneath the notes that makes them sing. No, Anne, it is not the chords or the accompaniment. That's right, it is the words. As Shakespeare said, and said often, what would we do without them? Without the words, we'd only have one half of song and dance. Without the words, then every show would be like Moominchance, and there would be all this room underneath all the notes that fill every bar. And Marcel Marceau would be our greatest recording star. Without the words, how could we tell the Dollies from the Maims? Without the words, sure, we'd still love them, but we'd never know their names. And we couldn't pine for sweet Adeline in perfect thirds. The drums could keep drumming and the music keep humming, but we'd only be humming.
That was, most of these things happen due to, I hate to tell you, but it's usually being at the right place at the right time, and you don't know that that's going to happen. So fortuitous accident.
Yeah.
And whether or not you're able to seize on those accidents when they happen, and if you're ready, or ready enough.
Yes.
And that's a big thing. It's been a learning curve for me, and I continue to learn. So that's the key. And that's one of the fortunate things about what we do, that we can continue to grow.
Well, let's go back to the beginning. So,
Sure.
where is your point of origin? Where did you born
I
and
was
raised? Where'd you grow up?
I was born in Jacksonville, Florida. I don't remember it because we left when I was 2. I have vague memories, and we did go back to visit a couple of times, but my memories were vague at best. I'm the eldest of 5. I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and one brother and sister are twins, and we're very close. My parents are no longer with us, but they were phenomenal people, and we all felt very grateful to have the parents that we did, that basically gave us permission to experiment and live our lives and do and fall in love with whatever it was that we fell in love with. I think that's one of the things that my dad particularly instilled. He said to me at some point, we spend most of our lives working. Try to find something that you like. If you love it, even better. But I don't care what it is. But that way, showing up to work, whether it's 9 to 5, whether it's, the kind of work I do, which is any hour, it could be an all-nighter, getting a chart written or whatever. Just make sure that if you like it, that'll go better for you.
Mhm.
And it's funny, I've run into that sentiment a lot later in the business, and I thought my old man knew something.
Yeah.
And he wasn't a snob about what it is, and I'm not a snob about it either. I happen to love what I do, but if somebody really loves their job as a plumber, they're probably going to make a better living than me. That plumbers are never out of work, and if they do it well and it gives them joy, I, I'm happy for them. Whatever it is that helps somebody to find their thing. So I say that because my parents instilled that in us, and we moved to Hollywood, Florida, right between Miami and Fort Lauderdale. And when I was 2, and the rest of my siblings were born down there, and we were raised down there. I went to, at the time, it was an experimental school, elementary school. I started in 4th grade and went on to high school at Nova, Blanche Forman Elementary, and then Nova High School. I say experimental because it was based on working at your own rate.
Sort of like a Montessori school.
Yeah, before there was Montessori, sort of, or certainly before I knew what that was. And it wasn't, you know, I think they were learning too, and learning the things. And some people could really work well at their own rate, and some people needed more of a discipline. I think you find, the best things that work for you, and that was good too. I think the teachers were figuring it out too. But
Hmm.
one of the things that I was really grateful for, and again, you don't see these things coming, because you ask 10 kids and they'll say, "Oh my God, I couldn't wait to get out of school. It was a nightmare for me, a horror." That wasn't not the. It was. I remember 8th grade was a little tricky. I didn't have much focus then. Um, I loved sports. I just knew I was going to be 6'6" and a basketball player. I loved playing basketball. I loved the geometry of it. I think a lot of musicians like math, and I was not very good at it. Ironically, it could have come more naturally to me. I just didn't have very good teachers until later, and teachers are everything. This is something that Mr. Sondheim has said many times, and it's something that I will, is one of his favorite words is teacher. And I owe my teachers everything. I owe them the greatest debt, But I was in a program called Contemporary Music in high school that started around when I was in 9th grade, and I remember seeing friends of mine do a musical called The Fantastics, and I didn't know it, and I loved it. I should also say that my parents, uh, my dad had this beautiful baritone voice. My mom had this beautiful soprano voice, and they loved singing together. Uh, and it was they should have made a living in music more than me. They were my dad particularly was very passionate about. They're both from New York originally, and Dad served in the army. He served in World War II. He used to say, I went in a 20-year-old kid, came out a 20-year-old man. But in his one of his platoons was a guy that they used to entertain together, and that was Sidney Chaplin, who went on to do many Broadway shows, including he was the original lead on Broadway in Funny Girl with a young actress named Barbara Streisand. And so he bonded with Sid, and he just kept that love of music, but he would play everything on his record player. I may have to explain to some of the kids that the record players are the discs that,
Well,
but,
now it's
but
kind of like back in vogue, vinyl.
I,
Vinyl's a thing. They would,
yes, and they pay far more for it too.
Yes, yes.
Crazy, isn't it?
What's old is new again, right?
Exactly. You know, something to be said. Listen, I still have all my records. I
I
can't
do
part
too.
with
I can't part with them. I can't
Yeah,
part with them.
that's part of the problem with my name. My last name is Savor, and some people think I should change it to immolate, purge, you know.
Yeah, yeah, my
Or-
husband's the same way. I can't. And I like the schmaltzy old easy listening music. So I go to all of these estate sales and drag back 10 more albums that I didn't have before. Old musicals, old Jackie Gleason, 101 strings. I mean, I'm really, really,
you're the Montavani girl.
yes, yes, yes.
Yeah,
I
it's
think,
funny. We'll get to this later. My freshman year of college, growing up in Florida, we had a lot of bands and stuff, whether jazz or concert bands or whatever. Not the orchestral programs at that time. They've gotten better, but they weren't very strong in Florida at the time.
Mhm.
And when I got to Cincinnati, all of a sudden I was surrounded by strings and orchestral, and I was so hungry for it. And I met this wonderful violinist at the time. I don't know what's become of him, but he was concertmaster of the Philharmonia Orchestra. We had two major orchestras at CCM, Cincinnati Conservatory of Music, College Conservatory of Music. And one was Philharmonia and one was Concert Orchestra. And he just had all the literature at his fingers. He could just play, because he had performed these things already by the time he was 18 years old. The Tchaikovsky, the Mendelssohn, the Sibelius, the Glazunov, you name it. And I wanted to get familiar with this material, so I would sight read through this stuff. And I said, Frank, how did you get into all this literature? Did you start studying? And he goes, I did, but believe it or not, it was all those 101 strings and Montavani and the easy listen. That is the last
I
thing I
love it.
expected him to say. I mean, I'm only telling you this because you said that, Jen. So
Yeah, I love that. I
isn't that,
love that.
you just never know what's gonna. It's like there's no way I would have thought. Well, he probably comes from the strict classical background. No, Montavani.
That's so fun. Well,
Isn't that
I
hilarious?
think we all had that experience when, for me, it was my grandparents had this beautiful console stereo
Mhm.
set, that had the turntable in it and all of these
Mine too. Yeah,
albums and
yeah.
the living room where no one was allowed to go, except when we had holidays and company over. It was, the kids weren't really allowed in there, but I would sneak into my grandparents' living room and pull out albums and listen to them. So I mean, it's all that great music.
That was the thing. I totally connect with that because uh, the great things about today, everybody streams everything, and the great thing of having a tangible record album is, first of all, the covers were large and they had pictures in them, and for a
Hmm.
kid, depending on what you were listening to. But my parents, again, one morning my dad would be playing Carmen.
Hmm.
Another morning he'd be playing Camelot. Another morning he'd be playing Harry James and his orchestra, or Tommy Dorsey, or uh, vocal groups, Vic Damone, Frank Sinatra,
Hmm. Hmm.
just everything,
Hmm.
or comedy like Fanny Bryce or Baby Snooks or what have you. Just like they just they were a collection of the kitchen sink.
Hmm.
And I'm
Hmm.
so grateful for that because we kind of fell in love with all of it. I mean,
Right.
to give you an example, one of those things, because they also had a player that played 78 records, the fast playing ones, and they had both Broadway musicals on there. Like Dad had seen the original productions of Oklahoma back in 1943, I think it was, and even In and Get Your Gun. So he'd seen Merman do that. But he also had a collection of Danny Kaye records. And they were mostly comical, not all, but mostly. But what I also was getting to know in my ear was the arrangements.
Mhm.
and these incredible arrangements. And at some point, I asked who was doing those and how did that happen and whatever, uh, that those questions started taking on more formation as I got to high school. But my imagination was already spurred, so I could look at the record album of Camelot and I could disappear into it. I could turn on that music. I would lay right between the big console, like you said, so each speaker was, and disappear into the world of Camelot
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
into the world of South Pacific or into the world of, whatever it was. And so I would do that as a kid. And there were a couple of moments that were, I would have to say, watershed moments for me. One of them was when my parents took us to see Mary Poppins. Um, and I'm old enough to remember when this came out, and I went, and there was this incredible musical on the screen. And when they jump into the photographs, I wanted to do that. I wanted to be one of those kids, and we were completely entranced by this new actress that I didn't know named Julie Andrews and young Dick Van Dyke. I had no knowledge at that time, of course, that they came from the Broadway stage first. Well, I say in Julie's case, first London and making her way there as a performer, and then you know working in musicals like The Boyfriend and My Fair Lady first there, and then coming to Broadway with them
Mhm.
before she got the opportunities to do the screen. And Dick Van Dyke had just done Bye Bye Birdie with Cheetah Rivera, and then got into the movies. And I wanted to know all of this music. It just uh, it just was a game changer for me.
So where
Telling
did the
stories.
piano come in for you? Where did you
I was
start really
always,
young?
yeah. My mother says that I was playing before. I was reading music before I could read words. I don't know if that's really true, but she would know better than me. I don't remember. I just know that for a very long time, due to both my youth and the fact that I wasn't growing very quickly, my feet couldn't reach the pedals very well, and I was sitting on phone books, uh, and I remember at first I would lay my head on the piano and play notes or play combinations and listen to the vibrations and listen. I think I was just as a kid falling in love with sound.
Hmm.
Uh, and uh, and wow, if I put these two notes together, this is a neat chord and what have you, and putting that together. Uh, so I was doing that, and I was studying first, not with very good teachers. Like there was an awful thing that happened where the piano was in the living room, same room as the television, and I had my lessons on Saturday mornings. Well,
Oh
then
no.
you, you can see the problem there because
Yes.
my siblings would be watching the cartoons. So my mother would make them lower it. And so I would memorize my lesson so I could watch, Johnny Quest or, Popeye or
Yeah.
whatever. I didn't want to miss anything. And that was, my teacher, it wasn't working out too well. So eventually I got this one piano teacher for years, and he was not as good for my technique, but not terrible. But he made me play Swanee River in every key, uh, and and so he was teaching me theory without
Right.
calling it theory
Yeah.
and developing my ear. At the same time, I had a buddy down the block who was playing guitar, and I heard him playing guitar one day, and I thought, show me this. And I kind of pissed him off because I learned his whole everything he knew in about an hour. I just picked it up. But I wanted to learn, and I was also deep into the Beatles, because they
Hmm.
were happening, and I wanted to learn everything they were making. And so I was just trying to be a sponge at the time, and so I kept playing. And later in high school, I changed teachers, and I who really helped me, in addition to the theory and everything, to develop some solid technique. And that was very helpful. Uh, but I think I mentioned to you um, that my high school, um, oh, maybe I didn't. Well, they had this theater program. I'd seen the Fantastics. And then the following year, because I was playing for one of the choruses in ninth grade as an accompanist, and my teacher said, "Hey, would you like to play The Music Man?" And I knew it was a musical, and he said, "Sure, here, learn this." And he gave me these two big scores, Act One and Act Two. They were humongous. They were
Mm-hmm.
like they were heavy, because that's what Tams Whitmark rented out in those days, or Music Theater International. They were the two.
Terrible handwritten.
Well, you know what? We didn't have computer or no finale or
Right,
anything like
right.
that. So it wasn't so terrible for me. It was just what was available.
It's
So
just
I
what it
got used
was.
to
Yeah.
it. And what my teacher, who was an excellent pianist himself and a Cincinnati grad, it turns out, he um, he at first I was freaked out because I was trying to play everything. Because if you look at those scores, they not only have the vocal line and the piano part, but they have extra lines for orchestration. And
Mm-hmm.
I thought I had to play everything. Why would I know? And I came into tears the next day, and he said, "No, no, no. You have to. You don't have to play that, and you don't have to." And he simplified it. And basically, what he started to teach me, and what was a continuing thing that I learned, was what a singer needed to hear, what a dancer needed to hear.
Mm.
And that was really important because you're playing rehearsals. So you're playing a dance over and over and over, and you realize, oh, they can't hear the downbeat, or they need to hear that hit, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And I just picked up on these things, and I fell in love. I really did. I loved the whole atmosphere of it. I loved being around all these people. They were all so gifted. And one of them in particular, whom I had known since fourth grade, her name was Paige Helmenthaler. And you probably don't know that name, but you probably know her as Paige O'Hara, who later on was Belle in the animated Beauty and the Beast. But I've known Paige since fourth grade, and we did all our high school musicals together.
My
and
gosh.
and so we learned a lot from each other in those days. And I I was then, I loved all this stuff, but I really loved theater. But I wasn't thinking necessarily of making a living in it at that time. I loved music, and all these kinds of things that I had been exposed to. I said I'd seen Mary Poppins. 2 years later, I saw The Sound of Music, or a year later. I was so confused that Julie Andrews had short hair in the second one. It took me half the picture to figure out it was the same person, really, and I had fallen deeply in love with her. Again, get in line like everybody else.
Right.
And these were game changing moments, because that was a spectacular event. When you saw a movie like The Sound of Music in those days, it's not like today. Movies come out all the time, but that was an event, and they sold programs and record albums, like at a Broadway show. And it had an intermission. It was truly an event, and it changed me. I think that sort of planted the idea of, wow, I really love that. I wonder if I could do that someday. I don't know what I would do, but just to be in that world. And then I started auditioning for colleges and stuff, and I knew it was going to be in music, because the basketball thing wasn't happening, Jeff. Um, so
The
I mean,
original plan didn't work out.
no, my freshman year, I had two big photographs, big photos, posters. One of the classical pianist Artur Rubinstein, who I loved his, Chopin playing and everything, and
Sure.
the other was Walt Frazier in the New York Knicks. So Those were my passions.
Interesting dichotomy, right?
Yeah, your husband probably knows that if you went in the gym, there's a big photo of the Big O, and the Big O was Oscar Robertson, Bucks, but he
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Cincinnati guy, so I got
Were
to
you
meet him.
still playing sports at the time in high school?
I
Were
did.
you on a team?
I was part of the team for a little bit, but even if so I went out for the football team once, and my coach said, "What do you want to be, the football?" And that wasn't a nice thing to say. So, but I loved sports. I loved the idea of. I particularly like basketball. I think because, as you know, in a sport like uh, football or baseball, everything happens within split seconds, very quickly, whereas basketball is ongoing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's constant geometry. And I love the idea of setting up a play and this and that. Little did I know that this would serve me later when I was not only playing, but when I was conducting shows, because there are so many elements in motion and they're never the same. It was like basketball, and basketball was like music. And I found an unconscious correlation between the two of them, where there was always phrasing, there was always, motion. There was where are we going with this? How are we going to arrive? How are we going to tell the story? How are we going to win? It was all related somehow. So this maybe tells you a little bit how crazy my mind is, but it was very helpful in terms of the way I thought, because you have to be sometimes 5 steps ahead of a performer.
Mm-hmm.
You can hear when they come on stage, oh, she's got a sore throat. I've got a sub clarinetist there. What am I going to do? Because that audience member behind me doesn't know any of that. And I have to make it work for this show, this performance, because I'll never get it back. So all of those things add in. I auditioned for several schools. I think Cincinnati gave me the most scholarships, so I went. And what could be a very long story, and I'll make it short for you. It took me 7 years ish to get through school because I kept leaving to work jobs. I went to Cincinnati. My first year, I was a theory major. The second year, I was a composition major. They couldn't just call you a musician. They had to put you in you've got to do this and you've got to follow that. And none of the rules worked for me because I wanted to do lots of things.
Right.
And I think this stems back from my father and mother exposing me to all these kinds of music. And the conservatories, what do you mean I can only do one thing? That wasn't going to work for me. I've got a jazz band over here and they sound great. And I've got an orchestra over here. And I was a kid in a candy store. What do you mean? I can't know Duke Ellington. I have to know Mahler only, or, that wasn't going to work for me. So I had to, just find a way to figure it out. Then I would leave. I would work on as a pianist on cruise ships. I worked in Puerto Rico for a little while. I was learning, a lot of different kinds of pop music at the time, dance music. I went through disco. A lot of different styles of music. And again, that was very educational, playing with small bands and small groups, and overlapping with the occasional headline performer, like Trini Lopez, or I was called to do a gig for this woman named Rosie once. This was either my senior year of high school or my freshman year when I was home. And I got called to work with this woman, Rosie, whose music director was very sick. And somehow my piano teacher got a hold of me, and I went down to Miami and I met with her and I played with her. And she goes, "Can you play the gig tonight?" Sure. And I went home and my parents said, "So how was it with, oh, Rosie's very nice. Do you know her last name?" I said, "I can't remember." And he said, "Well, what were some of the songs?" And one of them was, "Well, Come On to My House." And he goes, "You mean Rosemary Clooney?" And I said, "That's it. That's who it was." And she was just nice and sat at the piano bench with me and put her arm around me. And I must have been one of the three people that had never seen White Christmas yet, you know.
Oh
And
my gosh.
I worked the rest of that week with her, with Rosie, and fast forward years later, her longtime music director was a guy named John Otto, sadly no longer with us, wonderful jazz pianist and an incredible arranger. And you know, we had this connection, Rosie, of course, you know,
Oh
but
my
she was,
gosh.
you know, so that kind of thing started happening. My high school did a gig with Mickey Rooney my senior year, and
Wow.
we were performing our shows at the Parker Playhouse and in Fort Lauderdale, which is a major theater. But you know, and then the other thing that happened is when I got into the Cincinnati Conservatory. I don't know if you're aware of this, Jen, but they have the very first music theater program in the country.
Did not know
And
that.
yeah, I didn't realize it was the first, but it's certainly one of the finest. And I think they were, our two teachers in that department, the head of the department was this guy who was crazy in all senses of the word, crazy inventive, uh, inspiring, um, for me, taught me a lot. And his name was Worth Gardner. And the conductor was a guy named Oscar Kasarin. And these were pivotal people in my life, particularly Oscar, because he had been for many years a Broadway conductor. And he had made his living first playing in the clubs on 52nd Street that used to be in New York, you know, all of those great clubs that everybody would perform in, you know, and everybody who was performing in those clubs were also performing out in Vegas and everywhere else, you know. I didn't know that then. He was teaching me, and he played everything, and he could sight read like a fiend. And I was such a fan. And but he had worked with a lot of big name people, but he was there to teach, and he was really tough on the musical theater performers. And the productions that we were doing were, I didn't realize it then, but I knew they were excellent. Even the operas, you know, because there was this gal named Kathy Battle who was doing her doctoral work when I was a freshman. And I had such a crush on her because she was beautiful and she was short like me, you know. And I got to play for some of her lessons. But, you know,
Wow.
she wasn't a big deal yet. Or she was starting to be because she was doing some gigs with the May Festival. And James Levine was
Mhm.
running that, and then soon after took over the Met Orchestra.
Mhm.
So she became known. But I just knew her as Kathy, and I'd see her on the Scrounge Lounge at CCM.
Gosh.
And the people that I went to school with were, you know, folks like Faith Prince and Jim Walton, Jason Grott, Liz Calloway. They all have gone on to do many Broadway shows and everything.
Hmm.
But we were just a bunch of punks together in school, learning from each other and having a great time. So I was surrounded in this wonderful place with all this music. And that was an incredible learning experience. And Worth was very experimental. And Oscar was really, you know, which is very connected with the kind of work that we're going to be doing, Jen, because was, he played with everybody from jazz artists to the first person he worked with on Broadway of notoriety was Ray Bolger, who we know as the Scarecrow in the movie of The Wizard of Oz, but he started as a Broadway performer. And he used to do and improvise a soft shoe with it and kind of thing. So he taught me where my improvisational skills could come in handy for that kind of thing, and when you had to notate them and make an arrangement and why. But mostly with his performers, uh, he'd say, I'm not so sure I believe that. Or he'd find ways to get to the truth, to what does it mean to you? What do those truths mean to you? And I started paying attention to other things other than just music. I started really honing in on the lyric and just as importantly, the book of these musicals. What set up a song? As Oscar used to say, what's so important that you have to sing? You know, because if in a musical, you know, a lot of the great American songbook are songs from musicals, and they came out of very specific situations. So if there's a song in a musical, it's usually a raised moment. And the character, it's usually a problem of some time and something is to be solved. So how are we going to get from point A to point B? And what I started to subconsciously learn is we're always telling stories. And that is something that's as primal as probably the first human being sitting around a fire and telling stories. And we've always done it. And this is another way that we do it. But I was surrounded by people that were doing it and doing it magnificently. So I was just trying to be as much of a sponge as possible. And then I left school. I was working on cruise ships again for a long stint and trying to find a way to get back to school. I ended up going to the Cleveland Institute of Music for a semester. It was more classically oriented there. And I worked with great musicians there that were in the Cleveland Orchestra, people like John Mack, who was this great oboe player, and taught me about, you know, working with chamber music. And that was another thing that I was falling in love with, playing chamber music. But again, you had to interact and listen and work with people. And that didn't work out. I went back on cruise ships after that and started working at home a little bit. And then I went back to school to Cincinnati, and I was hungry to practice. I was hungry to get better. And I have to tell you that it was very liberating for me to be out in the world working first or intermittently. I don't know how to diplomatically say this, Jen, but you find out quickly that BS is everywhere. In schools. There's no perfect thing, no matter what they say. And once you find out that it's everywhere, it's kind of liberating, because then you can say, okay, so I have to figure out a way to make it work within whatever limitations. And I just shut myself up in my practice room and I practice and I, you know, hold myself up. I bring my homework in there, and I was like a kid in a candy store. And I just used the school then, and I mean that in the best way, to make sure it gave me everything I could. Also, my parents couldn't afford to put me through college. They were raising other kids, and when I came back to Cincinnati, a major thing happened. There was a piano competition, two of them, and they happened within a week of each other. One was called the Bauer, and one was called the McElroy. And I entered both of them, and I thought, I don't have a chance. You know, there are people that could technically play rings around me. And I was playing they said, you know, play two selections, things that you feel like you could communicate well. So I played a piece by a Polonaise by Chopin and a piece of Ravel. And somehow, out of all the hundreds of people that had competed, I won both of them. Don't ask me how. I don't really. I think you know, it's kind of like what composer John Kander says again, fooled him again. You know, it's just like, I don't know why.
What
but
made you enter if you thought you weren't going to win? Were you just there to say you had a competitive spirit, or you just thought, I'm just going to give this a shot?
I thought, well, number one, what have I got to lose? And two, I thought if I won third place, maybe I'd get some money and that would help. Because I came back to school. That's the other thing I forgot to tell you. I came back in the middle of the school year. I came back. Cincinnati at the time was on. They were on like trimesters. They didn't do semesters, and all the scholarship money at colleges is given away before fall quarter. So that money was gone. He just said, "I have nothing to offer you." So I said, you know, I had enough money saved from like cruise ships to get through my, you know, quarter, and I could pay for that. Couldn't lean on my parents. And I just thought, what have I got to lose? what are they going to say? You didn't place, so what?
Yeah.
And so I figured I'd give it my best shot. I also had gained a little bit more confidence in the sense that I was hungrier for just music. I didn't care about the politics of what was going on in the school or this and that. And I didn't know people anymore because I had left. And there was a new generation of people there, and I didn't know the other pianists. So I have found many times in my, I don't use the C word, career. Um, yeah, I feel like if I've had one, I've kind of potchkeyed it together. Uh, I know people that were really organized about it, and they got a manager and an agent and all the things. That I just didn't do those things, for better or for worse. And I just wanted to work. And this was one of those moments where ignorance was bliss, and my only job was to play as well as I could these pieces that I loved.
Mhm.
And somehow I won. I think that my communication skills were probably pretty good. In other words, getting the message across the footlights.
Mhm.
And it doesn't matter what kind of music you're doing that with, it's really important. And I don't know that I probably consciously did not know that. I just knew that I loved this music. And there was a sense, though, even then, of, oh my gosh, this is so wonderful. You've got to hear this. You've just
Mhm.
got to
Mhm.
hear this. This is incredible music. Like, uh, I know you've had the butterscotch ice cream before, but you got to try this. You just got to try the
Mhm.
Grater's ice cream, uh, taste this. And that became subconsciously my way of performing, just to give you a new taste of something that you thought you knew. And let's face it, Chopin and Ravel hadn't been around for a while, but this music was new to me.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so who knows why? But the point is that that afforded me the rest of my college education. Thank
Wow.
goodness.
Well, were
It's
you evolved enough as a musician at that point to find your own voice in that, in the music that you were playing, or was it one of those things where, as a young musician, you were looking to artists who were, the standard, the gold standard during that time to emulate what they were doing, or was it a combination of both?
I think it's always a combination. Musical theater people at that point were imitating every cast album they heard, or Barbra Streisand, or pivotal singers that were changing the game. Yeah, I mentioned Barbra Streisand because one of the things that real people with craft talk about is her incredible phrasing.
Mhm.
In the 70s and the 80s, her instrument was at the peak of its game. And the kinds of things that she would do with phrasing, it's like, does this woman need to breathe? And I was picking up on that subconsciously. I worked in college with an incredible chamber music teacher named Lynn Harrell, who was an incredible cellist. His father was Mac Harrell, who was a bass at the Met. And Lynn was handpicked by George Zell to be his principal cellist at the Cleveland Orchestra when he was 18 years old. So he had quite an illustrious career, which was continuing as a soloist. But he approached the cello as a vocal instrument. He goes, I don't want to hear the bow. And he was a big man. The cello was like a toy for him. And he just taught me, if you were doing Brahms, it was like one endless phrase. And
Mhm.
I found a correlation between that and Streisand and Liza and Eileen Farrell, and it just like everything was overlapping. I was also starting to get into text of Schubert songs, text of all the theater things that we were doing. I should preface that by saying in orchestration was affecting me in a deep way because I started doing some arranging for a big band when I was in high school. We had a really great jazz band. And he let me arrange some of these shows that we were doing, shows with Paige and with our other artists and with the jazz band. And I started learning how the instruments worked. And that was great fun. Then somebody bought me one of the songs we did that Paige sang was a song called Another 100 People from a show called Company. Now, I didn't know this show. I was in high school. and and then somebody as a birthday gift bought me a cast album, and I thought, what is going on here? And this guy's using a flute and a Harmon muted trumpet together. He's stealing my best material because I was doing that. I didn't know who Jonathan Tunick was. I would get to know him and work with him years later, but he was the orchestrator who, has done many great musicals like Titanic, which was recently done at City Center again at 9, but primarily all the Stephen Sondheim musicals of the 70s. Company, Follies, A Little Night Music, Pacific Overture, Sweeney Todd, those things, and I was becoming aware of who that was because really I got to know the actors and the performers that were doing that. If you had asked me as a kid when I was listening to Gypsy, who wrote Gypsy? Ethel Merman wrote Gypsy, as far as I was concerned. I didn't know who Julie Stein was, and I certainly didn't know who Stephen Sondheim was, who had written the lyrics. And the performers were the things, and I thought also, I remember thinking, who is this guy Stephen Sondheim that's talking about marriage and relationships in a realistic way that I could believe? It wasn't just "and they lived happily ever after" kind of lyrics. It was he was dealing with ambivalence. He was dealing with how do you feel about marriage? Well, you're always sorry, but you're always grateful. You want her thinking you're not alone. You're still alone. You don't live for her. You do live with her. You're starting, and all. And the guy asked this question. By the end of the song, he said, "I'm sorry I asked,"
Right.
But it was like, this stuff was real. And even back in my late years in high school, I was saying, who is this guy? And I started becoming familiar with the work. Then when I was in college, my friend Jimmy Walton bought the score to Company. Either he bought it or he got it in the library. I don't remember, but after we were rehearsing the show 1776, and Jimmy and I went through the entire Company score from beginning to end, the prologue, the exit music, that just every bit of it. We sang as much as we could, and I'm just like sight reading like a fiend, and we're just like discovering this world. Because it was the 70s, and it was so humbling and so incredible that this artist was alive at the same time we were, and that he was doing this stuff. Little did we know that Jim Walton and Liz Calloway, who was in school with me later, would move to New York and immediately get into the next Sondheim musical after Sweeney Todd, which was a piece called "Merrily We Roll Along." And that was game changing, but all of these things were happening all at once. They moved there. I didn't move there right away. I was writing jingles in Cincinnati. I was playing with a wedding band and paying my rent, playing weddings on the weekends, and doing whatever. And then eventually I moved down to Florida, and I was asked to teach at the school that one of my teachers, who ended up being Paige O'Hara's mom, Joyce Hall, for a year at a theater school down there. And I did that. And then I was working some gigs in Miami, and I was dating a girl, and she was a dancer. And I thought, well, there's a dance musical that's coming into town. Maybe she'll like this. It was called Bob Fosse's Dancing. So I went and I took her to the show. It was playing at the Parker Playhouse. And and there were 3 acts, by the way. So a couple of intermissions. So what do you think I did at the intermission? I moseyed down to the pit, and I'm more interested in the music that's coming out of it. I mean, the dancing was fine, but I didn't really understand it, stand it. And I struck up a conversation with one of the musicians and talked to him both intermissions. And I met the conductor, a guy named Milton Setzer. who had conducted several tours for Bob Fosse, it turns out. And it also turns out that he knew my high school music teacher.
My goodness.
Coincidentally, this is what I want to tell you this story because it's one of those fortuitous accidents, if you will. And I had to go to that teacher's house, I think, to pick up some cassette tapes of some music that I needed. And he said, "Do you know a guy named Milton Setzer?" And I said, "I just met him. We just went to dancing." He goes, "Well, he just called me because I must have mentioned that I knew, that they somehow knew each other. I don't remember how." And he goes, "He wants you to call him tonight after the show." And I said, "Well, I'm playing a gig tonight in Miami. I'll call him after." And needless to say, we didn't have these, Jen. We had, I called him
Old
from the
fashioned.
payphone. And he
Yeah.
said, one of our pianists, because they had 2 keyboards in the pit, they were touring, is thinking about leaving. Would you be interested in this tour? And I said, "Well, where's it going?" And I'm starting to write and make a list because I got my pen and paper ahead of time. And he said, "We're going here, and we're going all over the United States, and we're going to Japan, and this is what it pays, and this is your per diem." And my eyes were like, this is more money than I had ever even knew a musician could ever make. And he goes, "Let me call. I'm going to call you in a few days from Texas, where we'll be, and I'll let you know." So he calls me, and I've got my list, and I've got another list of questions to ask him. Okay, like I asked you, right?
Uh-huh.
So it never ends. And he said, "I'm sorry to say that he's decided to stay." And I was
No.
so disappointed, because I had totally put all my eggs in that basket because I was saving up to maybe move to New York. I was afraid to move to New York, but my teacher, Oscar Kasarin, gave me the courage because he said, you know, just remember that excellence is the exception and mediocrity the rule. And I said, even in New York, and he said, especially in New York, because there's more people. So there's more good people, but and there's always room for somebody that is gifted and wants to work hard. And both are equally important. And so that stuck in the back of my mind. And so, back to this, where I was disappointed. And then out of the blue, 3 weeks later, he calls back on a Sunday morning at 8 o'clock in the morning. Now, Jen, what were we talking about? Morning,
We
right?
don't know there's 2 8 o'clocks.
No, no coffee. There was no
Right.
coffee. And I was
Who's
like, who was
calling
it?
me at 8 o'clock in the morning? Who
Thank
dares
you.
call me at 8 o'clock in the morning? I'm asleep.
Thank you. You understand. And so I was living with my girlfriend at the time, and he said, "Milton Setzer, the job is available. Are you still interested?" And I said, "Yes. Could you hold on 1 second?" "Susan, get the list. Get the list." Get the list. Next thing I know, within like a week and a half, he mailed me 3 copies of music to look at that were 3 of the more challenging things in the show. There was no cast album for Bob Fosse's Dancing, so it's not like I could listen. And today, what will kids do? They'll get on YouTube or something. We didn't have any of that. If there wasn't a cast album, you didn't even have a guide. So I flew into Houston. I watched the show twice. Then the next day, it was kind of bus and truck a little bit. Went to Waco the next day. I played the matinee. I played the next day in Amarillo, and then we were in Denver for a week or two. And I had taken over, and basically I got my first Broadway tour before I'd ever moved to New York.
Goodness.
And I was working with a load of dancers up there, many of which had gorgeous voices, and they had worked with Michael Bennett and Bob Fosse and Gower Champion and you name it. And I didn't even know who these people were. I didn't really even know who Bob Fosse was. I knew it was important. He was somebody important because it said Bob Fosse's dancing. So later on, when I met him and worked with him, I didn't know enough to be afraid of him. or nervous about him
Mm-hmm,
or
mm-hmm.
anxious about him. And he was a really great musician, and he made me feel at home. He would kick off a tempo, and he meant it. He understood music. He understood what swung. He understood. Uh, he said I would come back to my shows and then I'd slow down tempos because the dancers were going faster and they were cutting corners in the choreography, and he taught me a very important principle. Actually, he said never confuse tempo with energy. They are not the same. And everyone says, oh, it needs more energy, it needs to be faster. Not true. Not true, at least according to Mr. Fosse. And I remember seeing him in Fairway Market, which is a shopping center on the Upper West Side of New York. And we were going through the line and we were talking, and he was talking about time. And he said, press against the conveyor belt. And the lady was looking, and he goes, don't worry, he won't break it. Uh, and you can't, he goes,
Mm-hmm.
it keeps on coming, just like Old Man River, just steady on, no faster, no slower. And he was the one that at that point said to me, that's time, and it's more than a magazine.
Wow.
And that is a phrase that you'll hear a lot now, but I had never heard it before. And Fosse was the one that instilled that thing of time. And he goes, if things are too fast, they don't swing. The first number of the third act is a song called "Sing, Sing, Sing," and it was the Benny Goodman, his arrangement
Mm-hmm.
that he did, the whole thing. And he said, if that thing is too fast, it's not going to swing. And to hear it from him and why was again, it's wonderful that I've gotten to know some wonderful performers and directors and composers, but what's been most pivotal to me is what they've taught me, what they've given me. And that is the thing that I love passing on to students, to young people, to my colleagues, if I can. If my colleagues are open and want to continue to learn or whatever, you can sort of gauge that when you're working with a group of people. But I just steal. That's all I do. I don't know that I have an original idea in my head, but they say steal from the best, but I have,
Was there anything that when you were uh, growing as a musician, as a youngster, and you were learning from all of these people, you had pointed out that one of your college professors was particularly a stickler about things. Was there anything that they were really strict about and insistent that you learned that you were just like, why? This is more. This is just too much. And then later that you were grateful for.
Good question. Uh, I think there were actually some teachers that were teaching more general classes that I felt that way. For example, many people that were music majors of any kind had to take music history. And you usually had a book by Donald J. Grout,
Oh
History of
yes,
Music. And
it's thick.
the way it was taught in my school uh, is you kind of read through two chapters, you took a midterm, and you try to memorize everything that Palestrina did and wrote or whatever you were studying about. And then you study the next two chapters, and that was your final. And so it became a memorization game. And that wasn't fun for me. That wasn't applicable. And I was like, what does this have to do with me? And I argued with my teacher, and he says, well, you have to know where to get these things. I said, I know where to go, the library, and it wasn't a good enough answer. Uh, but then I had so that was problematic for me because I didn't understand what it had to do with me and all of music because I was spoiled. I was spoiled with all these kinds of music, and why is this important? Why is this music important to me? Of course, I found out that it was. because it's all music. But I found that out later by this guy that was teaching 18th century counterpoint when I was in Cleveland. And Dr. O'Brien, he just loved it. And we were dealing mostly at that point, and not with Palestrina, uh, but we were dealing with Bach, and how these things work together. And we were dealing with the B minor mass. And it's like, and this stuff was as chromatic as Stella by Starlight.
Mhm.
It was incredible, and he was so excited and alive about it. And I started to understand how this music applied later. Also, there was another guy. He was a student, a grad student, and he, sometimes you'll meet other students and they understand things that you don't understand. And I was doing 16th century counterpoint, and it was being taught by somebody who was, so we say, less on fire about it. And this student said, but let me explain to you the concept of counterpoint a little bit and how it applies. I said, how does this apply to me now? And he goes, well, do you like Stravinsky? And he said, I said, only with mayonnaise. And no, I said, yeah, no, I did like some of it. And he goes, well, I want you to hear something you probably don't know. Come over to my house later. So I came over to his apartment, and he played me a ballet I didn't know that was from what they referred to as the neoclassic period, because you know how they chop up early, middle, late Beethoven and what have you. Well, they do it to everybody, but life doesn't always work that way, as you know. And he played me Orpheus, and I didn't know Orpheus. And he said, listen to the French horns here. Listen to that counterpoint there. And I've said this to you several times, I think, Jeff, I fell in love. And then it wasn't just pedantic. Then it was like, now I could take this information and apply it to myself. So can you find a more exciting way to teach those things that people can automatically turn off when they hear a history of don't finish the sentence, I'm bored already,
Right.
or music theory or analysis of music. But again, if you the key word is music, and that's a good thing. And if you find a way, how does history apply to me today, and what were they learning then, and all of those things. And these teachers, to sort of answer your question in a long-winded way, these other teachers found ways that I didn't see how to apply it at the time, and saw ways to open it up for myself. Likewise, when I got to New York and I started working in the theater, I started to get opportunities to work with people that were people I knew as composers and never dreamed that I would meet, let alone work on. My first show was, guess what? The Fantastics. And it was one of the few times that I had to audition, because usually actors, singers auditions, dancers, but musicians usually get contracted or something. And I was new into town, and I didn't know a lot of people. I knew my Cincinnati friends, and that proved to be pivotal too, because my first job subbing on a Broadway show came from an actor. Those connections, because a new guy took over a chair, and he was from LA. He didn't know anyone, and she goes, "I know someone," and it turns out that way. It's word of mouth. A guy
So did you get this? Did you get a job in New York after you finished the tour, or was that just a natural, or
yeah,
did you move there and just?
I did the tour. Good question. I did the tour. We went to Japan. It was a great experience, but I was getting bored. I wish I'd stayed on it a little bit longer, because they were going to Europe, and to go to Italy and France would not have been a terrible thing, as I look back. But I wanted to get to New York, and I wanted to see if I could work. And I was also I was young and I didn't know how to grow with a show, a long running show, which is challenging. You're doing the same show over. And I didn't know yet how to make it always new and fresh because I was too young. And I didn't have that information yet. Uh, and so I went, and a friend of mine who I'd gone to CCM with had been a music director of the Fantastics, and he goes, "I'll see if I can get you an audition with the composer Harvey Schmidt." The Fantastics was the longest running show in the United States at that time. It was running in the Village at the Sullivan Street Playhouse,
Mm-hmm.
and it was the second longest running show or play of any kind, second only to the Mousetrap, which was running in London for a long time. And but because it's a very small space, small cast,
Mm-hmm.
and just piano and harp.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. So you have no place to hide.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty exposed. And Harvey was it's a very formidable piano part. It's like an orchestra part.
Mm-hmm.
And so he felt very strongly that you needed to audition for him, even to substitute on it. That is not the case on Broadway shows and many off-Broadway shows, but it was on the Fantastics. So I went up to his house on West 74th Street, 313 West 74th. Harvey and his collaborator, Tom Jones, who wrote that, and then their first Broadway show a couple of years later, wrote Montana in the Shade. But they are two Texans, and they're from Texas, and uh, they, you know, they were rooming together at one point with Robert Benton, the film director, and then little by little, each person got their own place, and Harvey just stayed in that apartment. And I don't know if you know this, but Harvey is an artist, or was an artist, great painter, and made his living as a commercial artist for Harper's Bazaar and various magazines. In fact, do you know the logo for the Fantastics, that scratchy
Yeah, yeah,
writing?
yeah.
That's his handwriting.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah, so I have many cards and letters from him that I've saved because they're like pieces of art. And so Harvey had you auditioned with the overture, Soon It's Gonna Rain, and I Can See It. And they were formidable piano parts. The overture was an out of body experience. I don't remember how it went uh, because I was playing Beethoven for Beethoven. And Harvey had this goatee and a kind of a stone face, and you couldn't really read him. And I was just nervous. And then I started playing Soon It's Gonna Rain, and he started to sing. And I subconsciously went into accompanist mode, and I
Mm-hmm.
started to accompany him. And then I got less nervous and started to settle into it. And then same thing with I Can See It. And he gave me a couple of little notes. And then my friend Norman called the next day. Norman Weiss uh, was long associated in New York with the show Phantom of the Opera. But Norman said, "You're able to do it. You can substitute the show." And I ended up taking over the show as music director. And that was my first job. And while I was doing the Fantastics, which was to this day one of the hardest shows I ever did, off Broadway, Broadway, you name it, because as opposed to playing in a big orchestra, there's nowhere to hide, just you and the harp. So
Mm-hmm.
you are naked out there every night. And it was all that background I had doing chamber music, and all of it came into play here in the Fantastics. And it was so challenging, but so wonderful when it worked. It was magical when it worked. And you're making $1.50 basically. You couldn't make enough on the Fantastics in those days to pay your rent. So I was starting to sub other shows on Broadway. And each one of those is a fortuitous mistake. I say because I got a call from a guy named Tom Fay, who I knew, wonderful pianist, and he was deathly sick, didn't have a sub for his show.
Oh
It was a
no.
show called The Rink that was written by Cantor and Ebb,
Mm-hmm.
and the headliners were Cheetah Rivera and Liza Minnelli, and a lot of people in there like Scott Ellis, who became a director, and an unknown named Jason Alexander, who later on went to Seinfeld, of course, and stuff. But uh, I had to sight read that. And I did it because he had 105 fever and I felt bad and I found my sub and did that. And that led to a friend of mine called me a few days later. He was supposed to sub for me on the Fantastics, but he got another job. This new Sondheim James Lapine musical called Sunday in the Park with George that was going to Broadway. So he was one of the two pianists, and he called me and said, Jeff, we need an extra rehearsal pianist for Sunday in the Park with George. Stephen is working with a new orchestrator and he's a little nervous and he wanted extra orchestra rehearsals. That new orchestrator was a guy named Michael Starobin, who is now a Tony Award winning orchestrator, but that was his first show. And he had done all the previous shows of the 70s, as I mentioned, with Jonathan Tunick. So he said, we're going to need to do extra orchestra rehearsals and we're going to need somebody down at 890 Studios to rehearse with the cast and Bernadette Peters and Mandy Patinkin while we're rehearsing the new show. And I was like, sure, I'd love to do it. I'm doing the Fantastics in the evening, but I'm available days. And then I said, and that was a guy who is, a wonderful music director himself, Ted Sperling, and a director, very gifted man. And I said, Ted, why me? And he goes, well, didn't you play the Rink the other day? And this was before social media, Jeff. It's like, how did you know that? He goes, well, I didn't even look at the conductor. I was so busy sight reading. He goes, the conductor was Paul Gemignani, and he's Stephen Sondheim's main conductor. And he said, if that guy's available that sight read the Rink, see if you can get him. And that's how that happened. And that was the first time I got to work in the proximity of Stephen Sondheim. And I only mention that because, many of my, if you want to call it career things or opportunities, came by crazy accidents like that fell into place. And gratefully, I was ready enough that when I played the Rink, that I got through it okay. I have to tell you, it was absolutely terrifying for me.
I can imagine.
In fact, I remember two things right after. I was going up the stairs and I saw Cheetah, and she says, "Hi, I'm Cheetah Rivera," as though I didn't know who she was. And I said, "Hi, I'm Jeff. And I played piano." He goes, "Oh, really? I didn't even know there was a sub." And I didn't know until later that was the best compliment you could get, that they didn't know there was a sub there. And the other thing that happened is I went across the street. That show was at now it's the Hirschfeld, but it used to be the Martin Beck Theater on 45th Street. And I went across the street to Barrymore's. And I said, "Sir, I've never had a martini, but I need one right now, I think." And he said, I'm going to make you my finest, because I was so nervous. And I, needless to say, did not expect to get a call to work on a Stephen Sondheim musical,
That's amazing. And that developed into a friendship, right?
Well, certainly, I wouldn't say that Steve and I were close friends, but we were certainly friendly enough. He was very generous to me, and we worked in different capacities on like 6 shows together. I did sub on a couple of shows, like there was an off-Broadway production of Pacific Overtures, and I loved that piece. And then I was working on the show A Chorus Line. This is after I'd gone back to teach in Cincinnati for 2 years myself, and then came back, luckily, on a job with A Chorus Line on Broadway. And I took a leave of absence. I remember I was there for about a year. And I took a leave of absence to do a little show from one of my classmates, Stephen Flaherty, who teamed up with his collaborator, Lynn Ahrens, and they had been writing for a bit. And their first produced show was a little farce called Lucky Stiff. And so I was the music director for that show at Playwrights Horizon. That was, long before they had written, shortly before they had written Soon to Write, Once on This Island, and then, of course, shows like Ragtime and other shows, Anastasia. Uh, but you know, that was their first produced show, and I did that. Came back to Chorus Line, and then I was offered. Uh, Paul Gemignani saw me on the street and said, "Would you be interested in coming over here to our show and working with us? I need another conductor." Because me and the assistant are working on a new show called Jerome Robbins Broadway, and that show was Into the Woods. And so I quickly learned that show to play the synthesizer part. And within like 2 or 3 weeks, I was conducting the show. It was fast. It was really fast. Uh, I think most of the original cast was still there. And that was the first time that I'd been, you know, given a job where I was conducting sometimes, and I ended up taking over the show. I conducted the last year of the show. I think I conducted it longer than Paul Gemignani did, just by default, because here's the crazy thing with the Sondheim piece. A show like Into the Woods has now become iconic, and everyone knows it, and everyone's done it in their high school. We were not a hit. We did not pay back. We did not last 2 years. Now, in the last revival, they went in humming the songs and singing the songs. Nobody knew the songs. We couldn't sell the show. I think people
Crazy.
catch up with Steve's work, you know.
Hmm.
But I also was getting to know other writers at the time that Steve admired, and he was their friends, and he brought me closer into the work of Sheldon Hornick, who became a longtime friend, and an incredible lyricist and a good musician himself, and Jerry Bach, which of course they had written, you know, shows like Fiorello and She Loves Me, and of course the landmark Fiddler on the Roof. And I did many shows with Sheldon, and then you know Bach and Cantor and Ev. I did 4 or 5 shows with them. The long running Chicago. I did. I did. It's strange for me to say this, but it's this revival that, you know, we got great reviews of Chicago, and we thought, and I remember reading it on opening night, the reviews, and thinking, well, we might get 2, maybe even 3 years out of this. You know, these are great reviews. It's still running, Jen.
Yeah,
It's still
yeah.
running on Broadway, and I was the original associate conductor of the show.
Gosh.
So you just never know how it's going to go, you know. So
Hmm.
I know
Hmm.
I'm sort of all over the place, but I'm just sort of giving you examples of like these you know, accidental, you know, these accidents that you can seize on, and people get to know you and know your work. And I was also starting to compose a lot myself then, and starting to you know, write with a collaborator, and all of those things. So
And you said
you
you
know,
were
I
nervous going into some of these situations. What gave you the courage to do it? Was it paying the bills, or was it, you know, that
part
you
of it
were
was that
just,
New York has never been a cheap place to live. That's for sure. Uh,
yeah.
but well, as I said, you know, with Harvey on that first audition, uh, I was he started to sing, and I became comfortable because I had been accompanying all these wonderful singers while I was a student at
Mm,
CCM, who I felt like they were wonderful, but what did I know? But what I realized is my colleagues were Broadway material,
yes.
you know, and how would we have known that as kids? You know, I just knew that they they were wonderful, and I learned to listen,
Hmm.
and just listen to everybody. Um, and I think I mentioned to you that my ignorance was bliss a lot of the time. Uh, when you start working in New York, yes, you have to pay the rent. And I got called to do some unusual classes for a woman that they were mostly straight acting, but occasionally she wanted underscoring for scenes. So I would underscore a scene or whatever. And then one time she said, "Okay, Jeff, get up and do the scene with Emily or whoever it was, from Member of the Wedding or whatever we were doing." And I said, "Oh, I'm not an actor." And she goes, "But you have to underscore the scene. How do you know how it feels?" So I said, "Well, what do I do, ma'am?" And he goes, well, just, yeah, I read the lines, but he said, pay attention to your scene partner and listen. Just listen to her. And she started opening doors, and that was Uta Hagen. And I didn't know who Uta Hagen was really, but I learned quickly. Of course, she's got this landmark book called Respect for Acting and
Yes.
everything. But again, I didn't know enough to be nervous about her, and I just listened and learned. Listen, listen, listen. And I think part of my ignorance was I was so busy in it that I didn't know to be scared or nervous or as much, or there was no time. You know, when you get up in front of an orchestra for the first time and you're learning, you know, you're learning how this goes. I'll tell you that I had to learn very quickly the score to Into the Woods, and Paul Gimignani did not take the time to teach that to me. It was his assistant, Scott Frankel. And many people know Scott Frankel as the wonderful composer of pieces like Grey Gardens, you know, and uh, he's done several things on Broadway, a wonderful composer and incredible pianist. But Scott went through that score with a fine tooth comb and basically said, this is where Joanna Gleason takes a breath. This is where you don't know where Chip Zien is going to go. This is where, you know, just like went through it. This is, and you have to give a better prep for your French horn here, and just every detail. And again, I thank Scott for that, because when I got up in front of the orchestra, I just, you know, I was so busy listening and paying attention. But I knew that score inside out because I had just studied it so much. And you hope for the best. And luckily, it went well, and they liked me,
The
and
rest
I
is history, as they say, right?
yeah, and plus, you know, Mr. Sondheim would come in, give notes, and he was so specific and so wonderful of all the people. I mean, all of the writers that I've worked with and directors, for the most part, have been really good at giving great notes, but nobody was better than Steve because he was so specific, so detailed, and you could collaborate with him. You know, you could ask questions and you could say, "What if we try this?" And sometimes it would be, no, you can't do that because the character blah 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 blah, and you feel a little dumb that you asked it. But you have to realize by the time he's given you a song or a new song, you're getting the 11th version of it. So he's already asked those questions and got the ones that you didn't think through. He really was, I don't use the G word too often, but he's as close to a genius as anybody I ever worked with. But his notes were so specific, so excellent, that you knew exactly what to do and how to help your actors, and how to give them the information that they needed to be successful and do their best work. And that's, you know, that's gold.
Yeah.
So I use those lessons still today. You know, I have hundreds of stories of all of these people and what they've taught me, and examples of what they've taught me. You know, but mostly they have to do with character and who is this person, and how do we get from here to there, and how do we tell this story, and how do we find something that's honest, and what are you doing with your hands, and why are you doing all that when the work is, you know, who are you, and who is this character, and so coming around to the kind of work that we'll be doing with the American Songbook again, finding out what is the world of that song, where did that song come from, and who is that, and when I'm working with students, the more they can be in what that's actually about, then they're not thinking about, I'm nervous so much, because they're thinking about the work that they have to accomplish. And the more they care about her and her journey, they're if they're caring people, and 99 times out of 100 they are, they start caring about their care and how we're going to make that journey um, because let's face it, in a song, lyrics are underwritten.
Yeah.
And, it's not like prose or a short story. You can't tell them. You only have usually 2 to sometimes 3 minutes if it's a long song, or a wordier song, but you only have X amount of time to say something. So a lyric is underwritten. Uh, I'll tell you one story, a wonderful story that happened to illustrate to you. And it was one of those times where we didn't have these cell phones and we can record. I wish I had had a tape recorder, but I was conducting a production of Merrily We Roll Along for Stephen Sondheim, and the book writer George Firth was with us. This is in 1990, I think, at the Arena Stage in DC. And opening night, I sat at a table with Steve, Marcia Milgram Dodge, our choreographer, and her husband Tony. And Marcia said to Steve, "What do you think of Irving Berlin?" Irving Berlin. And he immediately said, "You try to write God Bless America." And went through in great detail why he could never do that and how succinct he was. And he went on for the next 40 minutes or so, 50 minutes, talking about all the literature, one song after another by Irving Berlin, and how it was so wonderful and why he couldn't do it, why he had such admiration. And there's just nothing, Jen, that's more wonderful than listening to a writer talk about another writer with that kind of respect. Mm-hmm. So, for example, when you get a song like from White Christmas, incidentally, but Irving will write love. So you're not saying Pizza Man, or I care about you a little. No, he goes right away and says love, comma, you didn't do right by me. Just stop right there. Never mind music. Just love, you did the wrong thing. And he ends the song, of course, by saying, "You've done me wrong." Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So look what he's done, in just like a few words. And she's laid it on him. You didn't do right by me. I planned a romance that just hadn't a chance, and I'm through. And I mean to tell you, it's like, how do we get there? What happened that you finally had the nerve to say this to your lover or your person or whatever? And you've got to have a one-act play built around that, just around that lyric. And then you'll have a reason to sing. Yeah. Who is she? What happened to her? What's to become of her? Is she going to finish the song and jump off a cliff? Or is she going to survive and prevail? What's to become of her? I care deeply. So there's always a story. There's always that. And look what Irving could do. And look how Steve Sondheim admired that, And I can give you an example. But again, the great thing about listening to people like Sheldon Harnick and Harvey Schmidt and John Kander, Fred Ebb, Marvin Hamlish, some of these people I was blessed to work with, is what they learned, mm-hmm. and what they would teach me, and they started to open up a vocabulary for me that I could pass on to somebody else, because 9 times out of 10 I won't be sure, but the greatest tool, of course, is their imagination. Mm-hmm. So of those 10 people that you're going to bring into us with me and Laurel, we don't have their imagination, their greatest tool. And they're going to teach us things that we could never have known, and we can build upon that. And that to me is so exciting, So, I mean, I'm trying to sort of tie it together here somehow for you, that it's all information. I was lucky to work with those people. Laurel, I'm sure, has had a world of working with some of the greatest musicians and storytellers in the world. Mm-hmm. And has lived life, and that's the other thing, you bring life experience into it, and I've had a couple things happen to me in my life that have taught me some things, and you apply it all.
Hmm.
So, I mean, again, I could go off, we could talk for 2 hours about just Sondheim,
Yeah.
just Sheldon, just any of these great people in the theater. Mary Rogers, may she rest in peace, taught me a lot, women writing in the theater. People know Janine Tesori now from writing pieces like Fun Home and Violet and Thoroughly Modern Millie. But I met Janine on a show called The Secret Garden as a wonderful musician and pianist and conductor. And she's the one that ended up teaching me that show, which I also, like Into the Woods, had to hop up and conduct very quickly. And so again, it's those collaborations and learning very quickly and hoping that you've been given the tools uh, to do these things and to be able to learn to communicate with your cast and with your orchestra, and fit in, and not to mention with various personalities,
Hmm.
because there's a show, for example, where you've got Rebecca Luker, may she rest in peace, who was one of the greatest, if not the greatest soprano I ever worked with, just a voice of gold. And then you've got Mandy Patinkin, and that's a two very different personalities. And you've got to just find a way to make it work with this incredible orchestration and tell a story. And it's been my honor, you know.
So would you say, not to belittle it, but would you say that your successes have come from, just in a nutshell, your ability to come from a place of yes, yes, I'll do that, I'll try that.
Sure, why not? Unless it's something that I feel I'm really wrong for. Like I did the Rubber Bridegroom in Summer Stock, and I loved the show, and I think I did a pretty good job with it. But if somebody else was doing it, I'd say I try to cast a music director as though I was casting a director or a choreographer or a cast member. And I'd say, there's a lot of bluegrass music in this, and that is not a music that I learned a lot about it. I learned certainly more than I ever thought I would, but I don't know that I live there. And I'd find somebody that lives there. So
Mhm.
I might try to guide them to somebody that I think might be better than me or better
Mhm.
suited than I to that. But by and large, if it's subject matter that I think is interesting to me, because in the theater we're telling stories, or you're working with people that that you enjoy working with, and that comes from the history of working with them. Like I did a lot of work with this one choreographer named Jennifer Paulson Lee, who I have a lot of respect from. Started as a Broadway dancer, and I worked early on with her. Sadly, due to a tragedy, the tragedy that happened at Sandy Hook
Mhm.
Elementary School, and soon after, I conducted a huge concert, which we called From Broadway with Love, which was an all-star event. I had a pit of like 40 musicians, 40 or 50 musicians, and all volunteer. Broadway people like Stephen Schwartz and Mark Shaman and Frank Wildhorn and Brian Stokes Mitchell, people who couldn't attend and be part of the concert would send a video like Anne Hathaway or what have you. Everybody showed up because it was such a terrible tragedy. And we wanted to be able to give something back. So we did this all-star concert, which I conducted and put the music together with a guy that assisted me, and we became life friends, named Kim Scharnberg, who had a reputation at that time for doing a lot of Frank's musicals like Jekyll and Hyde, an orchestrator, incredible orchestrator, but just an incredible musician and a great person. And he became a spiritual brother because this was an example of something terrible happened and the Broadway community doing what it does. They show up. They show up. And they and we did. And then soon after I was asked by a director named Michael Unger to join him and a plastic surgeon named Michael Baruti that worked in the area of Sandy Hook, Newtown, to start a group we first called the 1214 Foundation, and then it evolved into New Arts. And for 10 years, we did musicals, one or two musicals with the kids in the Sandy Hook, Newtown area for 50 miles because there was a lot of PTSD and a lot of healing to do. And we made it about a healing experience for them. And oftentimes, like the first musical we did was Seussical from my friends Steve Flaherty and Lynn Ahrens, and they came to the show and they talked to the kids. But I incorporated musicians that were there in Newtown with Broadway musicians that came up and donated their services and their time. And that kind of work, that kind of healing work, because let's face it, our country has a lot of healing to do. Uh,
Hmm.
this is the great work, and maybe greater that working with those Sandy Hook, Newtown, I found a new family, and that was maybe all that Broadway work leading up to that was more important than anything, you
Hmm.
know.
Hmm.
And I find that I'm associated with projects that subconsciously have a lot to do with healing. You know, I should say on a personal note that I was married to an incredible person. Uh, Her name is Minerva Spara, and Memby was her nickname. We called her Memby, and she was had nothing to do with the theater. She was a salsa singer and an artist, a painter. Uh, the painting behind me is by her. And she's the mother of my two daughters, and we lost her to cancer about 16
So
years
sorry.
ago. My girls were 6 and 8, and your focus changes. And those days, I only had the attention span to take care of my daughters and the student that was in front of my face. But everything became more important in different ways, and important way to find a way into the work,
Yeah.
and into a way to how do you want to live your life, and uh, how can we heal. Uh, the theater writer Jason Robert Brown, who is somebody that I admire, both as a musician, a fantastic pianist, and a truly wonderful writer and a composer, lyricist, I should say. So he creates his worlds, and he wrote a song. Um, I'm not going to get political here, but let's say after an election, and it didn't quite go the way we'd hoped, and he wrote a song called Hope. And that song has a lot of application, not only politically, but in ways to help a person forward. So again, you can take this world, and this is about a person that's like, how do I find hope? I couldn't even get out of bed today. And in the lyric, he says, well, I got dressed. I got dressed today or something. And Jason found a way to find this little thing. It's like, and every, so many people, during the pandemic are say, hey,
Yeah.
girlfriend, I can relate, or
Yeah.
whatever. What did you do today? I got dressed. It was a big freaking deal.
Right. Right.
And find a way in, again, it's all tied together. It's all, mishmash, but finding ways for young people to make sense of the world around them, and to do through in a way through song.
Yeah.
We had done this wonderful concert, which I can tell you about another time, but it was really wonderful. And but we were hearing rumors and this and that. And 3 days later, Broadway shut down.
Mm.
And I happened to have booked a flight, you know, before that, just to visit my family, because I was supposed to go out to Milwaukee in April to conduct a production of Bernstein's Candide. And needless to say, that didn't happen. But we kept waiting. Everything just little by little said, well, maybe, no, no, no. And one gig after another got canceled. or anything, obviously, that you had to be in person. But I was
Mhm.
down in Florida with my brother and sister-in-law. Both my girls were in college at the time, and they said, "Oh, we can go back to school." And I said, "I think you better get down here. I don't know what this is. My parents didn't know what this was. My grandparents, we had no experience with this. So maybe you should come here. And if things get better, I'll send you back to school." Of course, that didn't happen. So,
Right, right.
but we were down there, and one of my former students, when I would do classes in the city, which I would generally have a class of 10 students, ironically, because they're usually like 3 hour classes, and I wanted everybody to have a chance to perform, whether we were doing monologue work or singing or what have you. And naturally, I'd hire a live pianist, so I wasn't stuck behind the piano while I'm trying to deal with bodies. And that's always better because you can have somebody performing live for you. And they were saying, "What are you doing?" They're starting to like, "I'm crawling the walls," Uh, and I can't do anything. And then somebody else called and said, "Well, why don't you do a Zoom class?" And I said, "What's a Zoom?" I had no idea. Why would I know? You
Right.
know, I think some business people knew, but I don't think any of us theater folks knew, or performers. And we quickly learned how to try to be creative within that means. And I found out, well, we'll have to use pre-recordings. And of course, it's not perfect with Zoom because it literally zooms into whatever sound. But within days, I had 3 full classes. And
Goodness.
I said to everybody across because they were, when you do Zoom, you could be like you and me in different time regions. And I had people in LA and people in Salt Lake City and China, and all ages, and I said, "Listen, if this sucks, we can always quit."
Right.
Uh, and a very long story short, we didn't quit. We kept going, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about that because it ended up being such a blessing where what used to be a 10-week course said, "Listen, I'll keep going if you want to keep going." Naturally, some people came from families that were independently wealthy and they could afford to pay me. Some people weren't working and couldn't work. And I wasn't going to turn anybody away. How could you do that? And we started doing that and process groups, which I can talk to you a little bit about later. But the
Mhm.
long story short of what you were talking about is like it turned into something that kind of saved us all, gave
Mhm.
us a creative outlet. And the classes weren't perfect, but they didn't suck. We were able to make progress, and we were able to bond and check in with each other. Like events were happening around the country that were, anti this or anti that, and George Floyd, and we took a break and all these things. But it was a very unifying thing, I think, in a very different way for performers. And we were all constantly checking in with each other. And it ended up being a major support group, which in addition to, learning and honing your craft, while you were crawling the walls, as they said.
That's wonderful. I wish I would have known you then because I would have totally been in on those sessions. I love to learn.
I ended up bringing in, not at all to be a name dropper at all, but I've been very blessed in my industry to work with some really incredibly gifted people. And guess what? They were all available. They were
That's
like,
amazing.
"Oh,
Oh
let me
my
check my
gosh.
calendar. Oh, I'm available." It's like,
I would die. I wish oh,
yeah.
darn.
No, I mean, we had, people like, one of my favorite, if not my favorite collaborator was the late Anne Reinking. And she did a class with us, and Cheetah Rivera, and, Stephen Flaherty, and, loads of theater folks that availed themselves and made themselves available because they, they were, first of all, they're friends, and that they're very generous. And they said, "Oh, I might be able to only do an hour," and then they ended up doing 2, 3 hours, or whatever, So, but again, we'll talk about. But it was one of those things where I think we find ways to be creative at all times, no matter what.
Is there anything that you can share with us that you're working on now, or is it top secret?
I'm working on this project that I'm going to be doing with you and Laurel Massey. That's fantastic. Isn't that amazing? You know,
It is. I cannot wait. It's going to be so exciting. I
I
cannot wait to sit at your
mm,
feet and learn.
no, you'll find that you'll be doing the opposite. You'll be learning from your students. I should say that I quote others. I agree with that, Bark. Um, uh, I quote others a lot because there's just so much valuable information. And a guy I quote a lot is Oscar Hammerstein II because there's so much useful information. But he says in The King and I, by your pupils you'll be taught, and there are no truer words. I learn more from my students than I can ever hope to teach, and it's very humbling. So teaching has become a very selfish thing on my part, I guess, on a subconscious level, because I'm the one that gets. They think they're getting something out of it. I'm probably getting the most. I get so much joy, and they teach me things I never thought I would never necessarily think of. You know,
Mhm.
I tend to, I can do one-on-one fine. I tend to like a class better because I bore myself very quickly. And as I learned from a wonderful director, choreographer named Rob Marshall, he said to me once, "The best idea in the room wins." There's a great story that goes with that, which I won't bore you with, but I like the idea. The best idea in the room wins. And sometimes that idea will be from that student over there that has an idea for the student that's performing,
Right.
and that's something that I never would have thought of.
Right.
And so I think if you can stay in a place of wonder, and just be hungry and want to learn and want to know, if you're curious.
Yeah.
And I find myself terribly curious about the world, terribly unsure of what is, but like Jason wrote, I think the hope is really important when things feel bleak, because if we lose hope, um, then we're sunk. You know, you have to be a little bit of Nellie Forbush in South Pacific. Maybe I am a little bit. I'm stuck like a dope with a thing called hope, and I
Mm.
can't get it out of this heart. So again, I'm a you know a filled with information of other people. But these lyrics, they're not just lyrics. And when it came to Mr. Sondheim, he given us nearly a Bible of a way to live your life. John Kander, Worlds of Beauty,
Mhm.
Yip Harburg, and Harold Arlen. The Great American Songbook is filled with almost a way to live your life, if you're open to it, and you find things that, how does this apply to me now?
Mm.
Which goes back to me being as a student saying, why is this 16th century counterpoint important? And for that student to say, listen to this piece of Orpheus by Stravinsky, and
Mhm.
opening up a world that I might not have thought of.
Mm.
So that's, when you put human beings in a room, um, as Mr. Sondheim said to me once, and it's not his quote, I forget who it is, but he said, people beat scenery. And I like that a lot, you know.
I do too. That's awesome.
That's what, at the end of the day, what these people want to come to is something honest, something that comes from them. And they'll be able to look in the mirror and feel good about themselves and their work. And it's like, look what I made.
Mhm.
Again, quoting Sondheim, and I do that a lot. I made a hat where there never was a hat. And I,
Yeah.
and I can look at that young man or young woman who's singing in front of us and say, you did that. You did that,
Yeah.
and that's bigger than us, you know? So that's the joy for me, Jen,
I
so I'm
love
really,
that. And I think it's going to be just wonderful to have you down, Jeff. And I just think that our students are going to be so lucky to share space, both you and Laurel. And we're just so blessed to be having you come and share your world with us and shape what we're doing down here. So You've been so gracious to sit with us today and share your story with us, and we're so happy that you did. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time, and we can't wait to have you down. And
I'm very equally excited, and um, I'm grateful that you know I'm sorry that Eugene couldn't do it. Eugene is wonderful. I met Eugene music directing a piece that I wrote, an adaptation of Sinclair Lewis's Dodsworth that I wrote the music to. And my lyricist and book writer, Stephen Cole, wrote with me, and Hal Linden starred in.
Making me feel good.
I have news for you, Mr. Dodsworth. This is the way it's supposed to be. Easy. You and I are easy. Nothing to unscramble, we just amble along. Taking life so easy, flowing like a river. Lacking complication, this relationship strong. You say nothing is perfect, whoever told you it would be? Without any bad times, tell me what good would the good be? Nothing is perfect, that's that, let's not have a fuss. Nothing is perfect, nothing that is except us. Easy. What we are.
There in Casa Manana in Fort Worth, Texas. So
wow.
yeah. So again, you never know. And Eugene's a great guy, but I'm grateful to be able to do this with you, and that it worked out schedule wise. And I can't wait to meet you in person, and Laurel, and to work with these wonderful students of yours. I'll be honored.
Oh, thank you. The honor will be all ours, I promise you. And we are so excited to have you down, and you're an inspiration.